The DX7 didn't invent FM. In fact, FM is an option that's available to you in most of the subtractive synthesizers that you probably use every day for the vast majority of your synthesized sounds. But the point I'm trying to make is FM is not anything crazy, new, radical, or even just like difficult. The theory behind it is very, very simple. And we're just going to kind of break it down for you in some instruments that you might be more familiar with. And FM as an option has been around since, the earliest modular synths. And here we have a software emulation as such. So let's break down FM. FM stands for frequency modulation. Modulation, where have we heard that before? Well, we've heard it a number of times throughout this course. And with our subtractive synths, we normally think about two types of modulators, the envelopes and the LFOs. And these are kind of hardwired as compared to, say, your performance modulators like velocity or the mod wheel. That still requires you as the performer to actually do something to get an effect. But we have some internal modulators that basically give us extra hands. So instead of me having to go in here and bring the volume down and change that manually for each and every note I hit, which would be very hard, not very practical, I have an envelope that can do that for me. And so if we follow this signal flow, the output of oscillator 1 is going into like summing amp number 1, which is then the volume being controlled by, oh, look at that, envelope 1. So now if I have some extra release, I don't have to worry about trying to control this manually, and the same thing goes for the LFOs. Speaking of the LFOs, that's going to tie into the F in FM, low frequency oscillators. All right, and what is a low frequency oscillator? Well, really what it gives us the ability to do is to cyclically control something based on a shape. So here I'll have a triangle wave. If I want to go in and control the pitch of oscillator 1, all I have to do is hook this up, and we can set the depth then here. Let's get it to be exactly 1 second. Set a depth, let's put it to an octave. And so we can follow along with that LFO, and it is following that shape. And of course, in some of our other instruments, we've had better visuals for that, but the sound is still exactly the same. My point is, this is repeatable. This is something that you're expecting to have happen. But when you go away from low frequency, which really just means below our range of human hearing, and into audible frequency, that is where you get FM. All right, frequency modulation, with the frequency being something that's in the range of our human hearing, usually between 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz, roughly that's kind of the general idea. And if you think about it, we could actually take this LFO and probably get it into an audible range. So if I bring it in right now and it's at 1 second, that's actually going to be very, very slow. And if I start playing notes, we're not going to be able to hear anything. We can kind of see the shape. And I can go slower. And I can also then start to speed it up. And as I go faster and faster, we start to see that shape change, and we start to hear something. Now there's this really bright buzzing happening. It's like an aliasing effect. That's because this LFO typically isn't meant to be brought into an audible range. Like, you're not going to use this as an additional like fifth oscillator or anything like that, because it's certainly not key tracking. But if I go in here and I change this to 0.1 second, all right, this is going to be really, really fast, and it's going to bring us into an audible range. So as we bring it up, we'll eventually hit like 20, and then we just start going up and up from there. And so you can hear that this LFO can basically be converted into an oscillator. And so what we would then need to do is actually take this and have it control some kind of other parameter here, all right? This is now no longer just an LFO. We're into just, it's become an oscillator. And I could have it control something like a filter, or most commonly what it would control is the pitch of another oscillator. And that would be FM as the method, because what it will do is, instead of it just like going from you can hear the cycle repeating over and over again. When I plug this in and start to increase the depth, we're going to actually hear like sidebands being generated. So let's actually bring this back down to something pretty slow. And we're going to do is we're going to take it and we're going to run it right on in here. Let's take it up pretty high. And then let's start to speed this up. Whoa. Okay. So we're not really even hearing that pitch anymore. It's becoming like one sound. And it's completely changing the timbre here. We increase that depth. It changes it even further. We can even change the wave shape to make it denser. What I could do also is we could use the PM as well, and that's what we would classically use for FM. This is the type of modulation that you get with the DX-7, would be the phase modulation, but the theory is kind of exactly the same. Here in this instrument, you get great kind of timbral variety, which is cool, but as we move forward and get to the dedicated instrument, it's always going to be more or less this PM type thing. It's more controlled. So if I take a different wave and I go into the PM, we get some very interesting results indeed. But what you would normally do if you want a little more control over all of this would be to run in another oscillator that's tuned, you know, precisely. And in this instrument, you can actually go and set up like really more or less classic DX7 style by using the overtones. I'm not going to get into that here. It's going to go a little bit too deep. But that is in essence what we'll be doing with our dedicated FM synthesizers, and you can experiment with it here. So I can take oscillator 2 and I could run the output of oscillator 2. Remember, this is not actually going to generate sound. It's being used as a modulation source, and I could then bring it in here to oscillator 1. These are 2 sine waves, so when we start to listen to this now, we get kind of like a bell-like timbre. And this is setting the range, so when I go really, really short here, you can hear how this is still operating like an LFO would. And as we go and increase the depth, we start to get those additional sidebands and harmonics, and you can see the shape of this changing. And remember, once we start to see those rough edges, that's when we know we're bringing in more partials to the sound. We're getting away from that sine wave and adding more into it. But this really isn't how the DX7 would operate. In fact, what we would rather do is go into this PM area here, and we get different options. We have fine, medium, coarse. We can use hertz as well. Let's just go with coarse for now, and you're going to hear what happens. Let's go down octave. But we can get so much variation from this. Right now, it's just 2 sine waves, and they're pitched exactly the same. They're tuned in the exact same way. But what if we were to, you know, bring this one like up by 12? Or to even like detune this a little, it's going to really change it. Let's go like to something weird like 5. Or let's like, you know, change the wave shape here. And so pitch plays a really huge role, the relationship from the pitch, or just in general the frequency of one to another. And here it makes it really easy because we can expect that like if we're at an octave range or like a perfect fifth or something like that, that it will probably sound pretty good. When we get to 7, it should sound a lot better. Or to really kind of make this obvious, let's go to 12. But what's kind kind of the issue with this right now. The biggest issue is that this is constant. And that's not really what I want necessarily. Let's just go into just our regular old gate message here. What I'd prefer is to be able to control kind of like the depth going in here to PM. But that's not exactly how I'm going to do it. What I'm going to do instead is use volume, because that is actually really what's controlling the intensity here. If I bring this all the way out, we're back to a sine wave. As I bring it up, you start to get those partials coming in. So let's find a maximum area that I like. All right, that's kind of probably what I'd want it to be. In fact, that's not what I'm going to do. Let's take the volume all the way out, because what I need to do, and I'm just going to have to then kind of set this to taste here, is I'm going to use some kind of a modulator, in this case an envelope, to control the volume of oscillator 2. Because if I do this manually, we can hear that I can bring this in and out, the intensity of the FM. So why not just have some kind of an envelope do that for me and bring this up like so. So let's have it rise, come back down, and then settle back at the very bottom, which means it's going to come back to a sine wave at the very end. Let's take a listen to it here. Let's just go full blown or almost full blown and listen to it. And that's really the basis behind FM synthesis. What I love about this instrument is that you can get even more timbral variety by using envelopes to control things. Like let's take envelope 2 and use that to control like this knob here, which is going to make this even more dense. Bring it up a little bit. Do something like this. And maybe also have it go into the fractalized control. This is going to be really wacky here. Let's take a listen. Maybe we want this to be more of a saw here. Something like that's pretty cool. It's pretty aggressive. We can go in and like stack this up. That might sound really cool, right? Let's just go here. Let's take this into mono instead, and we're going to stack up like 3. Go into like this sort of a range, right around that 12. Let's go here. Maybe we'll go back and add a little bit of release. And then what I'm going to do is, instead of just running the output straight in, this is the joy of something like modular or something that would be just a classic like subtractive, is that I could go into a filter and I could use another envelope on that filter or an LFO on that filter to, again, add additional layers of modulation to this sound. And that's how you can get really unique timbres with FM that you really just can't generate with classic subtractive. All right, so let's go and let's bring this in to here. And then we'll take the 12 and we'll bring that out. Let's go up an octave again. And I can take envelope 3 and I could have that control. Maybe I'll have that control actually the resonance here. And we'll have this one actually just decaying down over time. That's pretty cool. Then maybe have an LFO. So we can get some like really awesome kind of sound here very quickly. And remember that all we're really doing is we just have one single oscillator outputting sound, and the other oscillator is being used as a modulation source. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, because we still have two more oscillators that we could combine in some kind of a fashion. And that's really where, like, you know, the classic FM synthesizers come into play, where you might have 6 oscillators combined with envelopes, giving you operators all combining in different ways to really create some rich, interesting sounds. Like, just in my head, I'm imagining that being a really cool kind of loop for some kind of a composition or something. Moving on to the Tyrell N6, this is a free instrument and sort of your quintessential VA sort of software synthesizer. And believe it or not, this one does feature an FM option. And what I love about this is it puts it where I would put it if I was designing an instrument, right here inside of the modulation matrix. So we have our normal source destination thing going on. We could choose like an LFO to be a source, have that then control whatever we want inside of this instrument, you know, detune, cutoff, resonance, and so forth. But then we also have an additional modulator, and this modulator is oscillator 1, with the destination being oscillator 2 FM. Go figure. That's what we have by default. But like I was talking about with Botzilla, is that we could still send this some other places, like into the filter, so that you could get filter FM, or into the pulse width. You can get sort of like this super audio rate modulation happening on the pulse width. Very cool. And you can see that by default with oscillator 2, the shape is here on the square wave. Right, so you could then have that kind of jumping all over the place, and it would be going blah, 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 there on the pulse width for your square wave / pulse wave, right? If we have oscillator 1 selected, let's go up a couple octaves so we can hear. If I move the depth around, because the destination is set to oscillator 2, it's not going to have any impact at all. But if we were to bring in oscillator 2, you can hear that FM like so. And by changing the tuning here, that's going to greatly impact what happens with the FM. But also notice how I play different keys right now. This isn't really key tracking, so to speak. The relationship is very different. And this was what I was talking about. Just because the feature is there, you're not maybe always going to be using it, but I can adjust the tuning a little bit. You'll find that we can kind of lock in for each note on really nice spots, but once I start playing different places, it's kind of all over. So let's see if we can get something usable. What I'd probably do is actually go with this via slot, so that we could actually use like an envelope. Like maybe I'd go in here and I'd have like ADSR2 controlling this depth knob, so that we don't have to have it in all the time, maybe just at the beginning of the sound. Bring in some of oscillator 1, get a balance going. See if we can find something that sounds good. Sometimes can be a bit of a challenge. we'll add some filter. Maybe also stack some voices on here. There, that sounds kind of cool. And then if we were to say modulate, I don't know, the pitch of oscillator 1, it's going to really cause this thing to go kind of wacky on us, but it might be fun to try this out anyway. Find the right kind of range here. Maybe have LFO 1. For some reason, mod 2 is not working on LFO 1. I don't know why. I wonder if the mod wheel has to be up. Yep, that was the problem. My mod wheel was down. You can see that source here was mod wheel. So let's actually just put that to be gate so that it's going to trigger no matter what. Put some delay on. There we go. That's what I was looking for. So just a little bit can go a long way. There it is with nothing. Just a little bit. Turn the chorus on. Bring this rate down, actually. Bring the resonance way up. There we go, that's kind of a sweet spot. That's so cool. So depending on how you play the notes and how long you hold it, you'll get some of that LFO coming in. Try a different chorus mode. There we go. Yeah, really cool patch there, and the FM is integral, especially there on the attack. So there are times like this one here with a patch like this that's kind of wacky that I think the FM really works. It adds quite a bit to the sound. Here we have Monarch, which is a pretty faithful emulation of the Mini Moog. And yes, the Mini Moog did have primitive FM built into it as an option if you wanted to take advantage of it. And so we're going to talk about how you would set that up here. And the way you do it is by utilizing oscillator 3 as a modulator. So you can see modulation mix over here. This would also be the way that you could get like an LFO. And you can see that we have an option for low, which would probably be like a 64-foot pipe, which would probably produce a sound below the range of our human hearing. And that's actually where these numbers are coming from. They're pipe lengths, and it's divided by octave, right? So it's always a doubling, 32-foot, 16-foot, 8-foot, 4-foot, 2-foot. that's determining the octave, and then low would be even further down. Right now, this is having no effect. We have oscillator 1. If I bring the mod wheel up, we're not going to hear anything. But when I turn mod on here, or I turn mod on over here, what that's going to do is it's going to allow oscillator 3 to work as a modulation source, with the destination either being the pitch of oscillator 1 and also oscillator 2 if we turn this on here, or to control the cutoff. So if I turn this on, I bring the cutoff down, we can hear how we're getting an LFO, right? We can speed it up, or we can slow it down. And the same thing is going to be true for the pitch. If I bring the mod on, this is going to set again the depth. So is it going to be very narrow, like, you know, less than a semitone, or pretty far? I couldn't tell you exactly what that is off the top of my ear, but yeah, probably like roughly an octave range or something like that. But once we take this and we speed this up into an audible range, what we're getting then is primitive FM. Also important to note the key tracking feature. The key tracking feature is going to kind of scale this. And so it's not going to be consistent, right? So if I listen right now, the speed is going to be universal. If I turn key tracking on, this oscillator is going to speed up. It's like, you know, pitch tracking. So if I go higher, it's going to be very fast compared to lower. So it can be kind of a cool effect, but if you're going for maybe more classic FM, well, actually, you know what? I'm not going to say that. No generalities. You can try both. It doesn't really matter. Let's go ahead and bring this into an FM range. So I usually find that going 16 and 32 plus maybe a little bit of experimentation here will get you kind of a really interesting result. Let's try it out. And remember, oscillator 3 is not making any sound. Turn the key tracking off. Hear the problems. And one fun thing to do is actually to bring a little bit of noise into this, which makes it even crazier. Try the pink noise. Just maybe a touch. Try a different shape. It's all a matter of experimentation. So that's kind of cool. Maybe we bring in some feedback. It's pretty cool sound, isn't it? We go higher. It's all about kind of finding that balance. We could actually even bring oscillator 3 into the main mix here, so you get kind of like a sub-octave happening. Doesn't work out very well here, though. Oh, there it is. Oops. All right, yeah, something like that would probably work out. It's just about experimenting at some points. And the real problem with this, I forgot to mention, I was getting too excited making a sound there. Always a danger when you're having so much fun. And I'm not even saying that sarcastically. The issue is that with the real hardware, these things would go in and out of tune like on a daily basis and not consistently either. So you can imagine that with something as finicky as FM, these oscillators going in and out of tune means that it was a complete crapshoot as to sort of what you were going to get. And that's why FM maybe wasn't used on as many patches as you might think, because something like this sounds just really, really cool. But in reality, if we were to, like, let's say, again, we probably couldn't have saved on the old Mini Moog, but let's imagine we could. If we were to save one day, come in and load it up another day, it's going to sound different. Or if we took a picture of it on a Polaroid and we loaded up the exact same settings, we're like, wait a minute, why isn't this sounding the same? Or why is mine sounding different to a friend's? It's because all of these parts were known to kind of not be the most consistent in the world. So there you have it, FM with the Mini Moog. Last but not least, we can look at Serum, and this is actually a patch where I've used FM and I've put an envelope on it. I was just experimenting for a few minutes. We'll take a quick listen to this patch, then we'll just kind of recreate something from scratch, but you can hear it's a pretty cool sound. So this is utilizing a decent amount of FM. So oscillator B, which we're not even hearing any level from, is controlling here oscillator A. And we could even bring in some level here from oscillator B. Maybe that will make it more interesting. Nah, no, not really. That helps a little. Go up a couple. I think the real strength of an instrument like Serum when combined with FM is that you don't have to stick to the classics. You don't just have to use sine waves. You can use all the other really cool and neat features inside of the oscillator section, but staying true to using FM, frequency modulation, as the real contributor to getting that variation in timbre and in tone. So let's start by going with like Old Faithful. We'll load up a couple of sine waves here. This is like what you'd have on the DX-7, and you'd use something like B to be your modulator. A would be your carrier. That's why I'm muting B. And then I'm going to go in here on my warp effects, and I'm going to choose FM from B, and then I can set the depth like so. I even do get a coarse tuning option, which is very useful when you're doing like FM if you want to like slightly nudge things. But I could take this and I could bring it like all the way down, and this is going to now sound more like an LFO. And as we increase the depth, we can hear that range getting farther, all the way up to kind of an extreme. But that's probably not what we want to do. We'll go ahead and bring that back to 0, and we'll just work with our main tuning so that we can really kind of keep this in tune, keep it in check. So you can hear like the big difference even halfway has to this basic sine wave. And so if we wanted to set this up in more of a classic fashion, we would just put envelope 2 here. And you'd have kind of like a really simple not too complex FM sound. But what I really enjoy about this instrument is the fact that you can make this really wacky and really wild if you want to. So let's go and choose some kind of other waveform here. See, something's really crazy in here. That's kind of cool. Yeah, the wavetable doesn't do that much. I'm trying to find a wavetable that really goes crazy. I'll just go in and load one up myself. Let's try Mario. Nope. Let's try something else. Let's put the sustain up higher. And a lot of this is, again, just experimentation, so I am going to spend a little bit of time experimenting here, so bear with me. Tuning plays such a big role in this. It's just a little bit too wacky. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of these effects here to take this even further. And this is what I'm talking about. This is taking like FM to the absolute extreme. We're just using so many different features. And again, no sound is being output from oscillator B. I might go in and add a little bit of a sub. That seems to help a lot here. Having the biggest impact in the world. That is pretty cool. It's pretty wacky. So there you have it. FM really as the basis for creating just an absolutely wild sound that I never would have thought to make otherwise. Thanks.